Have you ever had a really nice sketchbook that you were really excited to buy because in the store or online it looked really nice, but then when you finally brought it home, suddenly you were like afraid to actually draw in it because it was almost too nice? I know I certainly have. If that's something that you can relate to, this might be the video for you. If you like this video, let me know by clicking that like button, perhaps subscribing, or even leaving a comment down below. All three of those things would be fantastic, and myself and the channel would very much appreciate it. When I was in art school, there was this artist that myself and a lot of other people in my department were very much like emulating in a lot of ways. He was an incredible illustrator, but he had these beautiful sketchbooks that he would create like very finished level work in. They were like these really beautiful works of art within themselves. Myself and a lot of my fellow students were very much inspired by this particular artist because he was very successful and he happened to graduate from the same school that we were currently in. So in a lot of ways, his success was very inspiring to us because it felt like it was possible for us perhaps to become that successful at some point. And maybe, just maybe, by going about our sketchbooks in the same way that he would go about his sketchbooks, somehow that might expedite our own success and get us to his level of draftsmanship and creativity. The artist I'm talking about is James Jean. He's a very famous artist still to this day, but when I was in art school, this was around the 2006, 2007 era. He was a very popular illustrator, not only for magazines and books, but he was also illustrating the covers for the popular comic series Fables at the time. Since then, he's really become like a world famous artist, far beyond comics and illustration. He's much more, I think, now considered like a fine artist. He used to have a really great blog called Process Recess. On there, he would post a lot of his finished work and recent jobs that he completed, but he would post a lot of process stuff, which was really great. More specifically, he would post all of his sketchbook work. He would do figure drawings from life. He would do drawings from his imagination. He would work with office pens. He would work with paints, charcoal, you name it. But James Jean and his sketchbooks at that time for me were incredibly inspiring, but maybe a little too inspiring. I can't speak for everyone I went to school with, of course, but I certainly remember very much trying to imitate and copy that way of keeping a sketchbook. So I was trying to draw these very elaborate drawings from my imagination that felt like finished illustrations. I was trying my best to utilize the composition and the full spread of the sketchbook. I even at one point got a hold of the same Japanese office pen that he would use for his sketchbooks, and I tried drawing with it, and no surprise here, but my drawings didn't come out looking quite as good as his did. But what wound up happening is that I would buy these really fancy, kind of expensive sketchbooks that had this beautiful like cotton rag paper in them. And they were these really nice hardcover bound sketchbooks too. So they looked beautiful as like an object in themselves. And then I would open it and I would have all this expectation of what I thought a sketchbook was supposed to look like because I was so inspired by this one particular artist. The paper was just so nice, I didn't want to like mess it up with like a bad drawing. I felt like I couldn't do just like a warm-up doodle. It had to be something that was compelling, told some sort of story, was rendered in a certain kind of way, had a real finished quality to it. And that of course would cause like a real creative block. Suddenly I wouldn't know what to draw in it, and I would be too afraid to actually draw in it. It sounds stupid and ridiculous if you're not an artist, but I know because I've had many conversations with other artists that this is not an uncommon feeling. So I of course don't blame James Jean for this or other artists like him that keep these beautiful sketchbooks. To him and to those other artists, that's very authentic and genuine to them and their process. But I started to realize that that's just not genuine to me and my way of using a sketchbook. It took a long time to realize that, and because of that, I would go on these long hiatuses where I wouldn't even use a sketchbook at all. Which is a shame because within the last several years, I've become very much a regular sketchbooker. And I have really seen such an improvement in my finished work because of this sketchbook practice that I've been keeping. I've been doing studies of other artists' work. I've been doing figure drawing warm-ups in the morning. I've been experimenting using different media, different supplies. All of this has really pushed me to become a much better artist, and it's happened very organically in a lot of ways. After a certain amount of time of keeping this regular sketchbook habit, I started to see a lot of the things that I was working on in my sketchbook find their way into my finished work. So I'm really grateful that I was finally able to get over this notion of what I thought a sketchbook was supposed to be, and finally just start using it for what I believe it to really be, which is a place to work out ideas, a place to stretch yourself as an artist, to experiment, to have fun primarily, a place to warm up, ultimately just a place to practice. You hear the finished song, or you read the final novel, or you watch the great performance on stage. But behind all of that, there's a lot of practicing that most likely didn't look or sound as pretty as the final product does. And it's the same for us as artists. Sketchbooks are a place for us to kind of do all the stuff that we don't want anyone else to see. Or just draw to wind down at the end of a night, or to warm up in the beginning of the day. Ultimately, the thing that I realized is that a sketchbook is not a portfolio. Speaking of art school, when I was in art school, we used to carry around these things. It's called a portfolio. This is where we would keep our best work. Even after I graduated, I would take this thing all around New York City to any publishing house or magazine that I could find and try to show them my work in physical form. But a portfolio essentially was like a display in book form of all of your best work. And somehow or another, along the way, I confused the sketchbook with the portfolio, and I kind of mixed them up a little bit. I thought they were the same thing. I thought that if someone ever was to look through my sketchbook, every drawing would have to be my best. I know too that what really adds to a lot of this confusion, I know it did for me as well, is that a lot of artists publish their sketchbook in book form. I hope to do that sooner than later myself, actually. But the thing that I was missing at the time is that those books were obviously curated. It was their best sketchbook work. It was only the nice stuff that they wanted to actually share with people. In addition to coming to the realization that your sketchbook is not your portfolio, I also want to share with you a couple of tips that have helped me when I might be struggling with drawing in my sketchbook or becoming too much of a sketchbook perfectionist. These tips will hopefully remind you what a sketchbook actually is there for, and just get the ball rolling so that you can finally just start drawing in it. So the first thing I might suggest is actually, after all this talk of sketchbooks, the thing I might say is to not draw in a sketchbook at first. There's something sometimes really nice and satisfying and very freeing about just drawing on typing photocopy paper, just loose sheets of paper. Maybe in a way it kind of brings us back to when we were kids and we would just sit on the floor and just draw on loose sheets of paper. There's a real low level of pressure too. You could always just crumble it up, throw it out. So if you want to reap some of the benefits of sketching on a regular basis, perhaps at first don't even think about a sketchbook and just start drawing on loose sheets of paper, or even loose leaf. Maybe after a while, if you've collected enough of those pages that you actually like or think you might be able to get something out of, you could bind them together by just stapling them together or something. And then next thing you know, you kind of have a little sketchbook. And then when sketching becomes somewhat of a regular practice to you, you'll probably be so over any kind of sketchbook block or perfection that you'll be able to just pick up a sketchbook and start drawing in it. The next thing I would say is, if you pick up a sketchbook that looks really nice, a lot of times we're attracted to nice looking sketchbooks, kind of just as these objects. It's really cool to have a nice looking sketchbook. I want them as well. But sometimes it creates a lot of pressure because it's almost too nice and it's intimidating to draw in. So the thing that I do that really helps me is that maybe even on the first page, before I start sketching anything, I just put like a wash down. Sometimes I'll put like tea, or if you drink coffee, you could just pour coffee on the page and it just kind of stains the page in a way. So you open up your sketchbook and the blank sheet of paper is staring you in the face. You're super intimidated about putting anything on it because you don't want to mess it up. My suggestion is to just sort of voluntarily mess it up. So add something on that page. There we go. Now it's not empty anymore. And that does two things. First, I think it brings it back down to earth. It shows that this thing isn't this like precious thing that you're not able or supposed to draw in. And then two, it gives you sort of like a cool underpainting or something to react against. Sometimes that white paper or that blank canvas, it could be very, very intimidating. It's like staring into an abyss. So by just adding something to it, I think it becomes, at least for me, it becomes a lot easier to then draw on it. You can even just scribble on a page. Whatever you can do to make it less blank at first, it'll just be that much easier to start drawing on it. And speaking of really nice, cool looking sketchbooks, here's a really nice, cool looking sketchbook if I do say so myself. This is the latest Stay Warm sketchbook. It's a wraparound cover drawn by yours truly. Last year, around this very time, I put out the first Stay Warm sketchbook. This is now part 2. It's a continuation of pencils versus erasers. That's sort of the theme that happens in these Stay Warm sketchbook covers. So the cover is decorated with my art. There's also an inside cover with some of the pencil preliminary version of that cover, as well as a nice little message from me. So this is a shameless plug, I know, but since we're talking about sketchbooks, I had to show you the coolest sketchbook I know to exist on this earth. It's the latest Stay Warm sketchbook. The pre-order is gonna be only for a limited amount of time, so you're gonna wanna get this once you see this video. All the info will be in the description below. I'm gonna have several different tiers where you could get the sketchbook, you could get the sketchbook with a sticker, and you can even get the sketchbook with an actual sketch drawn by me inside of it. You're gonna wanna check out that link in the description and get yours before the pre-order ends. Okay, so another tip that is kind of along the lines of pouring tea or coffee onto your page is also just writing on your page. It sounds weird maybe because it's a sketchbook and you're supposed to draw and sketch in it, but you could also sometimes, and I know I do, use your sketchbook as sort of like a notebook. Sometimes I just make little notes in it, and maybe because you might not have an idea of what to sketch at the moment, or you don't feel confident enough to start drawing something in there yet, you could use those same tools to just start writing with it. And then, if anything, later on, you could always draw on top of that writing. It's actually a little bit of an exercise that I did recently in my sketchbook where I wrote down the lyrics to a song that I really liked, and then I put a wash on top of it, and then I drew a little illustration on top of that that was inspired by that particular song. There's no rule to say that you can't write in your sketchbook as well. And it might be the very thing that just sort of gets you warmed up and loose enough to start drawing. Speaking of no rules in terms of having to draw in your sketchbook versus do other things, if you're trying to figure out ways of filling up those pages while also being creative and creating images, try making collages just by cutting out clippings from magazines or books and creating an interesting composition and illustration that way. It's still a great way to practice and work on compositional skills and storytelling skills by using material that might not be your own drawing. It's also just a really fun experiment that might lead to a different way of working and a different way of approaching perhaps something in your more finished work down the road. Plus, it could also just be a lot of fun too. I know some people keep journals and diaries, but sometimes thinking of your sketchbook as more of a journal can eliminate this whole concept of what should I draw? Because perhaps at the end of the day, you can just draw your day, maybe a highlight of that day or even a really monotonous part of that day. So even if you're really stuck on what to draw and you just want to draw the memory of you eating lunch a few hours prior, it's just something to draw. But also, if you do it regularly, it could kind of turn into a journal of sorts, where you're documenting your life and your day-to-day through illustration, which can very much help you become a better storyteller, a better draftsman, particularly if you're looking to do comics and illustration. Some of the best sketchbooks I've seen are the sketchbooks of the illustrator Marcellus Hall. He was one of my teachers from art school. But the thing that I remember from that class the most is him just sharing his sketchbooks. He would always keep a little sketchbook in his back pocket. And if he was in a waiting room at the doctor's office, he would start drawing. Or if he was waiting on his lunch in a diner, he would start drawing. He would just draw whatever he saw. As far as I know, he's been keeping a regular sketchbook for decades at this point, and he's kind of documented his entire life just through sketchbooks. It's really inspiring, and like I said, he's one of my favorite sketchbook artists, hands down. And if none of these tips and tricks work, and maybe you don't have any kind of like problem drawing in your sketchbook, it's just that you don't know what to draw, you can't think of anything to draw, perhaps consider using some sort of like sketchbook prompt. There's plenty of prompts online nowadays, especially as it pertains to challenges like Inktober. Those can be really fun, and it kind of challenges you to draw things that you might not otherwise draw without having to really think too much about what to draw. I happen to have a list of my own particular Stay Warm sketchbook prompts. You could actually find those prompts in the latest version of my Stay Warm sketchbook. It's actually on the very last page. There's a list of Stay Warm sketchbook prompts in case you get stuck on what to actually draw in the sketchbook. I did a May challenge called May Warm a few months ago, and a lot of the prompts that I used for that month-long challenge are in the back of this new Stay Warm sketchbook. So if nothing else, consider using some prompts to help you get started using your sketchbook. All right, so that's all I got to say in terms of getting over your sketchbook problem, sketchbook dilemma, fear of drawing in your sketchbook, whatever you want to call it. All of the things that I mentioned in this video really have and continue to help me keep a very regular sketchbook practice. Like I said, keeping this regular sketchbook practice has really allowed me to become a much better artist, I feel. Also, like I mentioned throughout this video, the new Stay Warm sketchbook is now available for pre-order. It will only be available for pre-order for a limited amount of time. So if you want to get your hands on this Stay Warm sketchbook so that you can keep your own regular sketchbook practice, I would check out that link in my description where you can go and pick this one up. It was really fun this past year seeing everybody fill up their Stay Warm sketchbook, the one that I put out last year. I've heard from a few of you that you've already finished that one. I know I'm like a few pages away from finishing mine, so it's perfect timing for a new sketchbook and a new Stay Warm sketchbook at that. That's it, I'm all sketchbooked out. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, please do leave them in the comments below. If you like this video, click that like button. It really does help the channel. As always, I really appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.